Populations, census, and sample. So when we're doing statistics, what do we mean by a population? A population in statistics is the set of all things under consideration for the study that we are undertaking. A population may be the adult population of Australia. It might be the students in your maths class. It might be the marbles that you have in a jar. Or indeed, almost anything else you can think of. People who go to the cinema regularly in WA is a population. What's a census? A census is a collection of data from every member of a population. For example, measuring the height of everyone in your maths class or noting the colour of every marble in a jar. A sample, on the other hand, is a subset of the population. We might take a 10% sample, so we only look at 10% of the population, or a 5% sample. So instead of collecting data from every member of a population, we select a sample and collect data from the individuals in that sample. There are various methods of choosing samples from a population, and there are advantages and disadvantages of using a sample rather than a census. So let's remind ourselves, a census is when we take information from every member of a population, and a sample is a subset of the population. There are advantages and disadvantages to each. So a census, where we take information from every single member of a population. It should provide a true measure of the population if we're asking everybody. Provides benchmark data for later studies. You've often heard people say, compared to 1950, X is different to what it is in 2020. X could be anything that they happen to be talking about. It's usually census data that they're talking about. Those are the benchmarks that they use to see changes in attitude, for example. Provides greater opportunity to get data about small subgroups. If you think about your population, it's split into groups. Different religions, different sports fandom, etc., etc. And some groups are very small. If we take a census, we get as much information as we can about those subgroups. But if it's a small subgroup, if we sample, we may not get much of a read on that particular group. What's the downsides? There can be practical difficulties in surveying the entire population. Some people live in remote areas. Some people don't have the internet, and so on. It may be time consuming, both in making preparations and in terms of processing the vast amounts of data that might come back. And it may be expensive for some of those reasons. You may have to employ a lot of people to process the data, for example. You might have to print a lot of paper. Think about all the paper that goes out for the Australian population survey every few years. So what about a sample? Well, it may be cheaper than a census for the reasons discussed in the downsides of a census. It may be less time consuming than a census. And if you're not after mega accurate data and you just want a quick read on something, think about things like opinion polls just before elections and so on. You don't have time to ask everybody. You just want to get a read. If good sampling techniques are used, it may be representative of the population. A lot of work goes into sampling techniques. What's the downside? The data may not be representative of the population, especially for small samples. So if you only take a 0.0001% sample of the Australian population, adult population, you may not get a good read, even if you use good techniques. And remember, we have the subgroups that we talked about, and we may mention those again here. They can lead to a lack of information about small subgroups. And because sampling is not on everyone, and we know that there may be some differences to the true picture for the whole population, it may not be suitable for future benchmark studies. And that means that if you talk about shifting attitudes from 1950 to 2020, you may not be able to state those with the same degree of confidence that you can if it's based on a census.